Uh, so Barry and Claire, let me turn it over to the two of you. Welcome to have you with us.
Thank you, Doug, for having us. I'll turn it over to Claire to introduce herself first, and then I might share some slides to kind of just tee up some of the conversation this morning, if that's all right.
Sure.
Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Hoffman. I'm a public health planner at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. I work on a lot of different projects, including this one about climate justice in Metro West. Just wanted to give a huge shout out to Deborah for helping us through every phase of this project and inviting us here today, and also for Doug for having us. So thank you. Excited for this conversation.
Thank you, Claire, too. And I would just double down on that with thanks to Deb, and then to Tom's observation, Tom's Daly's observation earlier too. We had a group of about 11 or 12. We use the title community climate liaisons, who are really kind of the real push to get participation and to connect with folks in the neighborhoods that we'll talk a little bit more about here across Ashland, Framingham, and Natick too. So thank you for that, and thank you again for having us this morning. I'm just going to share some slides so I can get this correct. Right. All right. Can everybody see the slides? Are we okay?
Yep.
Fantastic. So thank you again for having us today. Not going to spend a lot of time on this because it feels like a lot of people kind of already have the kind of understanding and appreciation for where we are now too. But in the face of climate change and those longer term change in patterns that we see, particularly in New England, and as we get even more local to Natick, Framingham, and Ashland, involves a number of different characteristics. One that's just highlighted here is how we just are progressively getting warmer on average as an area, but also, like we saw this summer, we're seeing longer and more frequent stretches of temperatures that are hotter than what we would normally see in any particular year. So we're seeing things like sea level rise, heat waves, droughts, if you've all experienced that too. I know we've talked to a lot of people in this project who really kind of care for their plants and their trees and their gardens, and just seeing how the drought has affected them and affected what people have been able to do with it. And then just the more extreme storms, I think that maybe are coming late in this particular season, but we saw what just happened to Canada, and we saw some stuff that's about on its way to Florida as well too. So thinking about how all that is getting souped up in a way that we didn't really see it in the past, and hitting us kind of more frequently and potentially more severely. One thing we really wanted to highlight through this project was that climate change can have effects on the natural environment. It can have effect on physical infrastructure, but it really also has a direct effect on people's health as well too. You may have experienced it, but I know I've interacted with people this past summer who had to take days off from work because they were experiencing heat stroke. They didn't have the ability to cool their homes, or they couldn't keep up with their utility bills. If you know folks who've had allergies or may have had respiratory issues, it gets really hard when it gets hot. It can really kind of affect it. Plus, we also see trees producing more pollen. I think we had an okay summer, I think, this year in terms of some of those mosquito-borne and other diseases, but we know that that's happening more frequently, the expansion of ticks. And then again, we know the effects that essentially can have on people if people lose power, windstorm, powerful storm, and then ultimately just kind of keeping up both with the idea of climate change, but how it affects us potentially on a day-to-day, or essentially after kind of a severe effect, has a kind of a role kind of in our mental and physical health as well too. So the reason I raise these issues is to talk a little bit about why we were engaged in this process. We know that it's happening, the effects are going to be different, and we all know that there's a human health impact in addition to the various other impacts it can have on their lives and the environments that we live in. So a big part of the Metro West Climate Equity Project was to think about, I think, two terms for us. One were the vulnerability factors, so characteristics that might affect someone's ability to adapt or cope with some of those impacts that we were talking about. So could someone be in a position where maybe they don't have the financial resources to keep up with the changes that they need to their home or to utility bills, or in a place too that might be more prone to floods or to kind of higher temperatures like an urban heat island. And we then really wanted to focus on what would it mean to be climate resilient. So I think for us, we see that as being a key part of climate justice, is that resilience is something essentially everybody can have, and realizing that people are in different places, meeting them where they are. So what are those characteristics that we can help address, invest in, partner on, collaborate on, to really make sure people can adapt more to some of those changes we were just talking about. So those are the concepts, essentially why we approach this project, and essentially the great partnership. And this is where I really appreciate Claire Rondelli being on here, Jillian as well, but there's similar municipal representatives in Framingham and Ashland who really wanted to do this work and have really committed to doing this work. So I really appreciate the municipal, the town, city support to push that forward. Sarah, you started mentioning this earlier, but we really wanted to focus on neighborhoods that might meet the environmental justice characteristics or definition in the case of Massachusetts. Massachusetts uses a definition that's based on the number of people of color, the amount of linguistic isolation, an income level, and a couple of other characteristics. So they're really defined in Massachusetts by kind of social or economic characteristics for folks. In other parts of the country, they actually sometimes use it much more, again, to your point, Sarah, on what people's exposures might be to hazards, to toxics, to other particular issues. But at least in the case of Massachusetts, the definition is based often on a lot of social and economic characteristics. So what you'll see here is essentially the areas that aren't shaded, those areas that are showing up in kind of coming through with the white background, are those areas across Natick, so West Natick, in Framingham, primarily South Framingham, and then Ashland, primarily Eastern Ashland, that have areas that meet those environmental justice characteristics. So those are the areas we really wanted to focus on, both for the work we were going to do, the perspectives we wanted to hear, and really the ideas for what we can do to think about those two issues of vulnerability and resilience going forward. I'm going to pause for a second and just see if Deb or Tom want to add anything before I talk a little bit more about kind of what the work ended up kind of producing so far. All right, just want to check, but Deb and Tom.
Oh, yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah, I have nothing to add
Okay.
myself.
Okay. Did you have a question? What was the question? I'm sorry.
I just didn't know if you wanted to talk anything more about kind of why we were doing the work, Deb, and what it might mean to you. You don't have to, but I just wanted to check.
No, I think that you were saying that we're doing the work because of my role is to try to get to communities of color and maybe disabled or people who maybe affected more by climate change issues. So we've talked to we're talking to Advocates Inc., that I'm affiliated with for mental health. We're talking to the Clubhouse in Marlboro, talking to people here in my building, and we're also talking to Natick Senior Center to try to come up with clusters of people that we can get, to talk to in those particular groups. Okay.
Thanks, Deb.
Barry, it looks like Cindy also had a question.
Sure.
Cindy.
Yeah. Can you just back up, just to give a little background on how this whole thing came about and how this that's just like the 1 minute elevator version. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll do my best. I would say with Claire here, and if Jillian, if you want to follow up with more background kind of on the Natick town side, please follow up with them. But there's been a number of initiatives, I think, in Natick, in Framingham in particular, Ashland as well, that have focused on issues related to climate. So there was a municipal vulnerability preparedness planning effort to look at various threats to the town, I think social infrastructure, natural systems, and how they were going to be affected. There's been a number of energy efficiency perspectives. However, at the same time, I think looking at participation, it looked like there may not have been getting the same level of participation and connection with folks from the environmental, who be living in those neighborhoods with environmental justice characteristics. And so this was really a concerted effort to look at essentially kind of greater inclusion across the town, and in particular to take a perspective that focused on kind of people who might be more vulnerable for a variety of issues, and begin to kind of lead and invest in that area. Thanks, Cindy. Thanks for asking. Thanks for a chance to answer that. So really building on the stuff Deb was just talking about too, and to highlight Tom's role too. In the past spring, we worked with a group of resident researchers, again, who we refer to as community climate liaisons, who we worked with to develop both a way to collect information about this topic, perspectives around people's kind of how they see climate affecting their lives, how they cope with it now, what are some of the programs they may currently participate, what ideas do they have for action. So we really wanted to be able to connect with them really, really closely. And so we had this group of 10 to 12 liaisons who really did work out in the neighborhoods, out in each of the 3 communities to connect with folks, to talk with them about the survey, and to recruit them to participate in the survey. Again, they came from all 3 towns. They either lived in or were connected with those priority neighborhoods, those areas that were environmental justice. And I think really the thing that we really appreciate the most is that they were willing to share kind of cultural connections and assets that they had. And so what that meant was, I think some of the things Deb just spoke about, connections to particular communities or residents within the neighborhood, folks who had fluency in Spanish and Portuguese and other languages, folks who are connected to East Asian and Indian communities in those 3 particular neighborhoods, really trying to connect with folks who are there, who are residents, but may not be as frequently involved or connected to some of the kind of normal goings on within the municipalities. Through the conversation with the liaisons, we really arrived that they would really wanted to do a survey to collect this information too. So through a number of efforts, through individual outreach by the liaisons, through going to certain locations. Deb, I think, frequented a number of grocery store and shopping center locations to connect with folks, as did Tom. Also in terms of being able to kind of reach out within kind of neighborhood settings or coalitions or groups that they were part of. We ended up developing and producing a survey that went up, and we had close between 850 and 900 people that participated across the 3 municipalities in it. And one of the things I can report on that was most exciting is that the greatest proportion of those who participated, when asked about why they participated, they cited a connection with a community liaison as the reason that they participated in the survey, which was a really great thing. The survey was also made available in English, in Spanish, and Portuguese all at the same time.
Yeah. Can I interject and
Please.
talk about, I went to Roach Brothers, and I had a table there. And as the people came in, we gave out the surveys. We also, Barry, had the incentive of the gift cards. So it worked really well. As people went to Roachburg, I say, hey, we're doing a climate study. I have a gift card, it's $5, but most people have a lot of money. And when I shop in Roachburg, it's expensive. So they were like, nah, keep it. But some people were like, yeah, I'll take it. So I also was able to do some surveys at the clubhouse in Marlboro with people and offer them the gift cards, which was a great incentive. Talking to people about climate change. The survey is very detailed, and it talks about a lot about how it affects them and what they like to see change at agencies. They would like, and we collect it's data collection. So it's very, very good. I enjoyed it because I'm a people person. I like meeting people. So that was right up my alley. So Tom had wanted me to try to get to the food pantry over there in a place to turn. That's the food pantry. But they also have one at Native Service Center, but they said no, they didn't want us to interfere with the people, the clients that come there.
Yeah.
But we did do, Did you want to say something, Tom?
Yes, that was I had a lot of frustration. I think Barry knows about this. Stop and Shop just wouldn't allow, because of the pandemic, they wouldn't allow us to do what Deborah did in front of Roach Brothers. All these had corporate policy. Nope, can't do anything. So those 2 places, and I believe the people in Ashland, I think they were able to do Market Basket, but I don't know that for sure. But I also had a frustration with the food pantries, both of them said, no, 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 you cannot do this. You cannot come in, you cannot talk to our clients. And that really frustrated me personally, and Barry knows that, because, you know, these are the environmental justice people that come into this place. And I could not get a survey from them. So that was.
Did they at least allow you to like leave us some flyers saying this was available or anything like that? Or did they not even allow that?
No, nothing.
Wow. Huh, that's disappointing.
It was disappointing. Yes, it was disappointing to me. It really was.
And despite some limitations, I think we did get a fairly good turnout. And I think, again, the connections that folks were able to make personally to kind of bring people into the survey, people who may not participate in some of the other kind of larger surveys that may happen across a municipality, was really wonderful. And what we found is essentially 4 out of people who participated in the survey were really interested in action related to climate change. Either thought it was somewhat urgent or kind of our most urgent issue to really begin to address. So really, again, was helpful to know that essentially this is a sentiment that was held. And when we asked in the same way, where did people see climate change? People were calling out, I think, the same issues that we see in a lot of places. Weather looks different. The storms that people are experiencing are more extreme. They're seeing issues with their own health, of whether it be kind of personal health or things they might be afraid of, like mosquitoes, issues around water quality, the ability to kind of go and cool off in a pond or lake, and whether or not it's open or closed, or other issues they may have, issue around water, and then issues around food supply were issues that people called out as well. Which brings us to kind of where we're getting to now, which was to take a couple areas I'll talk about in a second to move from that survey perspective to more of a conversation perspective. And so there's a group of 4 liaisons right now who have been able to kind of stay on with us through the work, who are organizing conversations to go a little bit deeper on some of these topical areas, primarily to think about what is the way to bring that attention to issues into the actions that cities and towns, or maybe community organizations, can take within their own work to address the issues of vulnerability, but really to focus on building essentially kind of community resilience across the entire community when it thinks about climate change. We're calling these the climate action conversations. And to give you a sense, essentially, we did that survey back in March and April. Since then, we've built out the kind of key issues that I'll talk about in a second. We worked with the community liaisons to build what a conversation guide would look like. What is the format it would be held in? What were the type of kind of conversations we'd look at, the way we'd produce results. And so again, there's a lot of co-creation happening in this process with the liaisons. So the 4 areas that have really risen up as the areas where they thought conversation should happen was 1, around emergency planning. So what are people doing, and kind of what does their readiness look like to deal with if we have some of these extreme storms and people are put into a situation where they're dealing with an emergency, or we see something that's like a disaster. What are the ways in which the clean energy and energy efficient programs can be more equitable in terms of kind of participation from people from a variety of different economic, social, and other backgrounds? What does it mean to get around without a car? So again, there's people who essentially who don't have licenses, don't have access to a car. What does it mean for them to get around, both kind of in the day-to-day, but also in the event of an emergency? And then an issue of access to blue spaces. So how are people getting access to places where they can cool off through water, ponds, pools, other issues, again, as we see hotter days happening in the future. And that kind of brings us to, I think, a bit of what we're hoping these climate conversations will focus around. And so these are just examples of some of the questions, but I think these are questions I think Claire and I would really be interested in opening up a conversation with you all around today during the time we can have on the call today too. So I'm going to pause there to see if there's any clarifying questions for what I shared about the project. And then Doug and Sarah, if it's up to you, love to kind of throw some of these questions out to the group to just hear some thoughts and maybe have a little bit of a discussion.
Yeah, that sounds like a good approach. Does anybody have questions about the overall project at this point? I guess maybe the one I would ask is, it kind of goes back to the beginning, like, how did you hook up with Natick for Black Lives Matter? Or, you know, how did you identify who to work with as liaisons?
We spoke to, I think, somewhere around 10 to 15 community-based organizations, maybe a bit more across the 3 municipalities, to talk to them about the project, to see about levels of interest, to see if folks they may have that they either work with or serve who might be interested in doing that. Working with the municipal officials, essentially kind of folks that they may know, connections they may have within those neighborhoods and folks who are kind of connected to those neighborhoods. And through that, the one area that ended up kind of providing us with the most liaisons or most interest was the ESL program. And that program essentially was a great place too, because it was one of the things where the group was interested in doing this work. And a number of cases, those who were taking the ESL program really saw this as also an opportunity for them to think about their English proficiency and how they may want to kind of work with that. And so we were really, again, like I said, in terms of sharing the assets that they had, they were able to speak in a language that I know I don't master well and kind of connect with folks. And at the same time, actually kind of look to communicate back in groups that were speaking primarily in English and to kind of build their proficiency and confidence around it too. Some of the other cases, I think, were some of the connections and people who saw the opportunity and reached out with a level of interest.
Specifically for Natick Black Lives Matter, I believe I received an email from you guys, I guess, because of the nature of my work, our work with people of color. You knew us from being a community based. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep. And I think you may have known Jillian as well too. And so I think both those connections are really helpful.
Yeah, and Jillian actually came on. We had a Zoom show with Julian and Deb Marion,
Yep.
who's a climate change activist, and we did it. She did an excellent job, Deb and Jillian, forge a connection there.
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, I think it would be great to go deeper on these questions. And I also just wanted to welcome Sally and Peter to our group. They joined after we did our individual introductions. So yeah, continue, Barry.
I'm just going to drop the first 2 questions in the chat in case people want to look at them, but we can stay on one or touch on both. But curious thoughts you all might have in terms of how we can help residents be more prepared and able to deal with emergency situations, or for people to deal with transportation needs. And not to say that they're disconnected, because in some cases they're probably very connected. But just wanted to start there and see if people have perspectives on those topics.
In terms of transportation, I assume you've probably been in touch with Josh Ostroff here in Natick. He's very involved in transportation and some of these same issues of how do we get around without cars, and how do we serve people who don't, can't immediately jump in their own car and drive someplace. So if you haven't talked to Josh, I would recommend. I'm glad to hear that you have, because he's been working on this issue for a very long time and knows a lot about it.
It's such a good point. I'll double back. I'm fairly certain Jillian has connected with him, and I know him through some of the MAPC connection. So, but I will definitely check back on that, sir.
Hey, Rick, had you intended to open your whiteboard there? Or?
Well, no, I was actually looking for what Barry posted. I can't find anything in the chat. So now I can't get the whiteboard closed, but I'm stopped. There we go. Okay. So yeah, sorry about that. Where is it in the chat?
Yeah, Barry, maybe it is in the chat, but perhaps you could just share your screen again and put it up. It might make it a little bit easier for people to see.
Just on a quick point, we have connected with Josh. He's been very helpful. We've had a couple of meetings with him, and he's connected us with the folks at the Metro West Regional Transit Authority as well. We're hoping to plan a more like regional transportation focused meeting between all 3 communities to sort of figure out how we can partner with them to better improve their service for these communities.
Are you able to see my slides again?
Yeah, we can see them. I think this might just be an easier way for people to see the questions that we're looking at. So I know the town has pretty extensive for emergency communications what do you call it when they call everybody's
Oh, like the
phone?
reverse 911.
Yeah.
You
I
have to
don't know.
sign, do you have to sign up for that?
That's a good question.
Yes, you do.
All right.
I don't know how I heard about it, but I did. And so I did sign up pretty early on. Oh,
It's pretty easy to sign up. You can just go to the town website.
right, but you have to know that you have to know that it even exists before you know.
Yeah, I mean, we've completely apart from climate, we've had issues in town where there's been extensive communication and activities by the town, and yet portions of the residents will say, I knew nothing about this. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's not a good way. If you're a homeowner, you get a tax bill. So there's a way that, the town knows that they're communicating with those folks. But if you're a renter,
Right.
like how is the town communicating with you? Unless you put yourself onto Nextdoor or Facebook or something.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say was I would think that the Red Cross would be a really good contact for emergency situations, because that is what they do. And we forget that that's what they do because mostly we just see that they do blood drives. But they are ready at a moment's notice pretty much all over the country, the world, right?
That's a really helpful. That's something I think that no one has mentioned before too, and I think that's something we can follow up on too. So yeah, thank you, Cindy.
Yeah.
I think the idea of the communication with the town, especially in regard to heat things, it is really important to, I don't know whether we, have them put up, big signs in the lobby of a building or what, but things like when it's really hot, the town does this reverse thing and says, hey, if you need a place to go cool off, here's where you can go. But Cindy's absolutely right. If you don't get that call, you wouldn't know. So.
Well, the town has been making more use, it seems recently of those electronic boards that they can put up on major intersections too, but
Yeah.
you're pretty limited in what you can communicate there.
I'm a renter and I get messages on the phone from the town. Also from the Natick senior center. The seniors, if you plugged into the senior center, I go there a lot and I get the information. But Pat Conway is Barry, do you know Pat?
We were just introduced earlier too, so yeah.
Pat is the beautified Natick, right, Pat?
Yeah, it's kind of our trash and trails.
Yeah, so Pat's a good person to connect with Barry on this, right, Pat?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna just mention a couple things. To what extent do you connect with them, WRTA and Ed Carr's group and Connect, what's it called? Something Connect. And those modal transportation groups. And I was wondering, was there any funding in the Inflation Reduction Act to support more public transportation, especially in the suburbs, with these, I don't know if, I guess Michelle Wood, she almost made some of the buses free in Boston. And I was wondering if there's a way to lower the cost for the people who are, rely on those transportation things.
Really appreciate those observations too. So to Claire Rondelli's point, we have connected with MWRTA and we will be talking with them a bit more too. We've been trying within some of these conversations, to your other point, Pat, to talk about the Connect service, because it is another service that I don't think is as known as it could be yet within some of the municipalities or within some of the neighborhoods that we're focused on too. But that idea that it's a more flexible service and kind of something that can kind of meet people's needs is a really helpful thing to do. And then I do believe that there was some funding within the Recovery Act that did go to regional transit authorities within Massachusetts. How they've all been using it is a little bit different too. So that might be a topic in particular we can follow up on when we connect with them. Go ahead.
Excuse me, there's one other thing I was going to mention because I've been working on it for about 8 years. I call them the Rogue Waterfronts all over Natick and Framingham. And apparently, it's pretty obvious when the temperature goes up 80 degrees and higher. We get these vast crowds of people that are coming in from all sections of Cochituate State Park. You know, they're coming in illegally. They go to Doug Pond. They have Rogue Waterfronts here and there, and they grill, they picnic. They're people who, without the resources to do their leisure on Cape Cod, you know, and they're trying to cool off. And I know that Peter Golden and a few other folks have been working on it a little bit with Lake Cochituate and the DCR, but there's kind of a low vision leadership at DCR in my experience, and there's very little accommodation for the surge of people from everywhere who want to cool off. And I don't know, that's a big issue.
I appreciate you raising that too, because we did hear that as well to some degree on the reverse side as well too, where folks who are looking to get access to the water, particularly folks who are coming from these neighborhoods, not being able to find parking, to your point, I think that idea is just the demand is so high at that particular point too. And so I think it's an area that we want to come back to, both in terms of, are there other opportunities for kind of cooling that we can think about? And at the same time, when some of the resources are taken offline because of water quality issues, it might also be a crunch for certain locations as well too. So I think as a topic where it's going to get hotter and likely people are in a situation where they can't go far to find those cooling, it becomes an even more important topic.
Gary, is it possible I could make a comment here, or Doug?
Please, I defer to
Yeah.
Doug.
Yeah, go right ahead, Peter.
I'd first like to say, Barry, I'm glad to hear that MAPC is beginning to turn its attention to this question. And particularly with regard to what I would call community engagement. The more people that become focused on the topic, the better. I don't think there's I don't think there's a question anymore on the part of virtually anyone in the larger population that climate change is impacting the quality of our lives and represents a clear and present danger to not just our generation, but that of our children and grandchildren. Pat, a moment ago, Barry made reference to a group called SOLA, Save Our Lake, which as of today has done a comprehensive analysis of a variety of issues impacting Cochituate State Park with regard to community access, climate justice, racial justice, facilities improvement, water quality in particular, which, as you may know, is terribly degraded, and now is beginning to turn its attention to the wider impacts on the lake itself, which we're beginning to realize, or have realized really, is a canary in the coal mine. I don't think this discussion needs to go much further without recognizing that the town of Wayland has been drinking bottled water for a year. And the town of Natick just expended somewhere between $5 and $6 million filtering out some of the PFAS chemicals that are impacting the community that exceed state stipulated levels. By the way, PFAS has over 4,800 molecular components, in other words, various forms of PFAS. And to the extent that we've dealt with one constellation of PFAS chemicals, there may be more coming. Lake Cochituate, by the way, it's been polluted for over a century. And I tip my hat to Massachusetts state government, which has been able to kick the can down the road for decades. The lake now is virtually unswimmable, 625 acres of magnificent water. And that represents a variety of challenges. But Barry, we did try to reach out to Mark Drazen, by the way, without luck. in the past, and at some point you may want to avail yourself of the body of research that SOLA has done. It's quite comprehensive. I'd like to sum up the net of where I'm at today, not because of SOLA, not because of this presentation, not because of the comment we've heard so far, but simply because I tend to look for what I call integrated, comprehensive, transformational solutions that impact metropolitan areas. And in that regard, there are three key issues here. The first one I would call cleanup, because SOLA has come to the conclusion that both the Charles and the Sudbury aquifers, which pretty well cover the territory you're looking at, are polluted to a fairly well. And there's a combination of historical factors, starting, of course, with the Industrial Revolution and the impacts on, for instance, Sudbury, which is exemplified by the Sudbury River, Lake Cochituate, of course, and groundwater in a number of towns. So cleanup is factor number one. That might, by the way, take EPA federal referee to fix that one, similar to what it took to fix Boston Harbor and the sewage runoff and so on that ended up with the Deer Island Tunnel and so on. The second thing I would call green up. There are over 75,000 miles of roadways in Massachusetts, and the urban area shows no sign of diminishing in its growth. So it seems to me that those roadways represent a significant opportunity to green up the region in order to diminish the impact of climate change on one hand and dramatically improve the quality of life that we all hope to enjoy. The third factor here that impacts those roadways directly, I would call move up with regard to transportation. And what we're seeing very clearly now in the refusal of large elements of the workforce to go back to the commutation needed to get into quote unquote the office is the reality that the workforce is distributed and no longer need rely on coming into the office constantly every day, every week. The opportunity cost of commutation, by the way, is virtually unmeasurable. It's so huge. It goes into the trillions of dollars annually, if you look at it on a national basis. So strategies that would minimize commutation on one hand, and on the other hand would rationalize the transportation network, which right now is situated somewhere between the year 1890 and 1930. It's absolutely horrendous. Elon Musk has met the challenge of electrifying personal transportation. There are any number of other companies attempting to do the same work, as well as create autonomous. But the reality is we need an integrated, much faster, much less climate impactful transportation network, which would include rapid transit, hyperloops, autonomous vehicles, and perhaps most importantly for this conversation, subsurface transportation opportunities in order to regreen the surface of Greater Boston. At the same time, that represents opportunities to allow for what I would call a gradualist, minimally impactful extension of housing inventory, which clearly does not meet the needs of the metropolitan area at this point. So there are any number of factors impacting all of what we've been talking about, and I just shared with you, and I'll give you one more. And that is what I would call the Black Swan. All of us know there have been significant efforts taken to minimize the introduction of natural gas into the New England region, which is great, except that your natural gas bill will double this winter and still will mine. And they'll be burning living room furniture in Europe in order to keep warm this winter. because no one factored in the Black Swan of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, which is hitting the European Union right between the teeth. It's absolutely horrendous. It's impacting inflation, it's impacting retirement portfolios, and most directly, it presents the very clear and present danger of nuclear war in the immediate future, which now leads us to the notion of population resilience, with a country where literally a third of the adult population is diabetic. And when you compare that to the way the state manages its parklands resources, which equal, by the way, upwards of 500,000 acres, and the way DCR treats places like Lake Cochituate, which is essentially a water skiing center, and excuse the expression, but to the exclusion of minority populations who view Cochituate as a real resource. Go over there and talk to some of the Latino, Native American, African American users of the place that have the opportunity to get in. As Pat noted earlier, most of them don't. You find a situation that is absolutely revolting, particularly on hot summer days when grandma, mom, dad, the kids are stuck in a car on Route 30, sweltering to death, and the park gates are closed. And by the way, that goes for Hopkinton and Ashland and virtually the whole network.
Hey,
So,
Peter, if you can start to wrap it up.
that's it. I mean, you basically got it. By the way, I think the folks at Solarberry would take it as an honor, if not a privilege and an obligation, if you reached out to them in order to look a little bit at that body of research. And by the way, I'm not done. And if I have not offended anybody here by talking too long or not covering enough territory or bored you enough, I'm ready to do more, because frankly, I am utterly outraged at the current circumstance, the lack of political leadership from the top on down. And by all means, Barry, let's rock and roll wherever you want to go, because folks, if you want to sit here on your keister and watch the Republicans destroy American democracy with a semi-fascist or fascist attack on what we're doing here, which is impacting all of us, well, good luck to all of us. Thanks.
So I think your essay has demonstrated that everything ties together, but
Yeah.
thank you for the comments. Barry, I don't know if you want to respond to any of that. I know one minor thing, just in terms of all the things that Peter was talking about, it occurs to me that I'm guessing that a lot of the stay-at-home folks that no longer feel the need to commute are not necessarily that heavily aligned with climate justice communities. Those may in fact still be the people that are engaged in the jobs that happen on site. But Barry, Claire, any thoughts about response to some of the things Peter mentioned?
One, just appreciate the perspective and for sharing that with us too. And I again, just I guess to lift up, because they're both kind of closer to ground and macro level issues, your systems level issues you're bringing up. The resonance with the folks who participated in the survey, who identified as people of color, who identified from kind of circumstances where they may have had lower household incomes, maybe not being the same, might be people with disabilities. There's a lot of resonance within that community. And at the same time, I'm not always sure they're included in some of the conversations around some of these topics. And so I really appreciate the way you framed it in Peter, in terms of like the injustice it presents in those regards. And so I think that's the one thing that we really want to lift up. And the one thing I will mention, and Claire can add on or correct me on this too, it sounds like a lot of stuff could happen just from some greater language inclusivity right off the topic, because there are a lot of places where people know these things exist or may not, but often because it's only being produced in English, they have trouble participating, being aware of it, knowing able to share it with neighbors too. And so I think as we talk about a number of these things, some of the basic changes just to make information and communications available in more than just one language on a regular, normal basis holds great potential for building constituency, for having people be in a better position of information, And I think to your point earlier, Cindy, once they know about it, they can participate in it. And so I think those are really kind of key points too. So I only note that I think Claire and I have to jump off at 10, but just want to turn it back and glad to find other ways to continue this conversation beyond here as well.
Thank you for that. Rick, I may have inadvertently lowered your hand. Did you have your hand up for a question earlier? Perhaps not.
It did, but let's, it's not a high enough priority. I'd rather have, conversation go on. So thank you.
Okay. Great. Cindy, I see you.
Yeah, just real quick, I would think that reaching out in some way, I don't know if anybody's on I don't really know what the State Natick Service Council is, but that would seem to be a really important potential ally. It needs to be done clearly in a different way. But it seems really important because that's their clientele, right?
Mhm.
That's a good point, Cindy.
And I don't know if anybody in this group is connected to that could be a resource.
Yeah,
Barry?
Deborah mentioned
yeah,
cooling station, heating station. That's the Natick Community Senior Center, not the
yeah,
Natick Service Council. And that I work in that building. It's a great place to come. It's utilized during the hot weather we've had in the past. Same thing with the cold winter weather we have, hopefully enough for a long time, the winter. So yeah, it's a great station and there's no reason you couldn't collaborate with the Council on Aging Community Service Director, Susan Ramsey. And I'm sure she would work with any group like this.
You know what occurs to me in listening to this conversation? We've all gotten stuck in silos and we're relying on institutional resources to get stuff done. I think if we took about 250,000 people and went down to the State House, literally, with a bill of particulars consistent with the reform agenda that represents the issues that are being raised here today, it's possible the people in the State House, if you hammered loud enough on the doors and shook the gates strongly enough, would begin to respond to what needs to be done. We're in a situation
Peter,
right now, I'll finish up in a minute, similar to what happened during the Vietnam War.
Long minute.
The only way Vietnam was stopped was by mass action. And we can sit here and ping pong back and forth all day long. I did something similar in Sudbury last week, by the way, and nothing will change. This is a need for mass action. Mass action and action.
Yeah, I think we all feel that. One thing I just want to be very cognizant of Barry and Claire only having 4 minutes left with us. And I think the question might be in a lot of people's mind, what can we do to help you out with the current phase of the project? Is there anything in particular that you'd like assistance with?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're having those climate conversations now too, and our real hope is to come back with kind of a short list of immediate actions that, again, we've talked about a number of different issues, but we do think that there are small actions, I think a little bit building off what Peter said, like that are potentially within our hands in terms of like us here, the community within the municipalities to make some changes that essentially move us closer to a place of lower vulnerability and higher resilience. And I think we're looking to kind of bring that back. And I think to the extent that you all can see that as something that can be shared widely within the town, and hopefully essentially some of the changes get made. That's essentially, I think, what we're looking for too. But I'll check with Deb to see if there's thoughts she has.
Yeah, specifically, I believe there's a couple of focus groups set up. Is that correct, Barry?
Sure.
And Doug, we would encourage, we'll send an email follow-up and encourage people to join the focus groups. That's specific action that can be taken.
Are you looking, Deb, for focus groups to include people that aren't part of the environmental justice communities?
Barry, can you answer that, please?
Sure. No, ideally, it's folks who are coming from those neighborhoods. We're kind of working closely with those neighborhoods too. So that's really kind of if there's.
Yeah, I don't want to come in and take over the meeting. You know, it should be for the people who are really
right. But I think on Peter's saying that we should go down to the State House, but see, what we can do is create a grassroots movement, which is what we're trying to do. Now we have Paul. Where's Paul Carew? Is he gone?
No, he's still here.
Paul Carew.
Paul's here.
Paul Carew is the community liaison for Black Lives Matter. And so he has tapped into several resources of people in the justice environmental area. But we want people to know about the focus groups and to get people in the justice climate area to come to the focus groups. So you might have some connections with a certain agency, for example, that has a lot of people in the focus group, justice climate area, that you can say, hey, come on to this focus group. Is that a good idea, Barry?
Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks. I think so, Deb. I think we may have to check back. I know, as you mentioned earlier, we're reaching out to folks at Avalon, we're reaching out to folks at Advocates, Employment Opportunities. So we're trying to connect with some folks, but we may need to come back to see if we might get your assistance. Please feel free to send connections you might have, but we're actively trying to get folks to those groups, and we really hope to be able to report back on those conversations.
All right. Well, we will put your email addresses in our follow-up email out to folks. So I guess I would encourage people that have questions or suggested actions to get back either to Deb directly or to you, Barry, or to you, Claire. So I see 3 folks have their hands up, and I know I just want to not go unsaid of thanking Barry and Claire again for joining us. I'm not sure how close to 10 you really need to jump off, but thanks very much. It's been a pretty illuminating discussion. But with that, let me go to Pat.
Yes, thank you very much. I was going to just ask a quick question. You said you had worked with Jillian a little bit. I assume you may be working with there's a new diversity outreach person, right? In Natick that was appointed by the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, Pat, I can jump on that. Jay just started last week. I'm planning on connecting him with this effort, but hoping to let him get get himself settled before we overwhelm him. But he will be introduced to the project and hopefully involved for the end push.
Good.
Great. And Rick, we'll circle back to you now.
There's also a new communications director, I guess, Claire, that's starting in terms of getting word out. I wondered about.
Oh, are these? I'm sorry. Jay is the communications. I thought they were the same person.
Okay.
I wasn't aware of a.
Thanks for
separate
clarifying.
position. Okay.
My question was just simply in terms of, I don't know if it's resilience or not, but what happens at night when, if there's a power outage, for instance, which I think we can expect at some point in the future, it's probably going to affect people without the means to stay cool at night. What do they do? Is there a thinking and a plan about that yet? That would be interesting to know more about.
There is, and Paul probably could speak more to this, but there is, I remember when we built the community senior center, there was a lot of discussion back and forth at town meeting about putting in a big generator down there, which I believe we ultimately did. So, if there were the case that, a big flood came or something and people couldn't stay in their home, I believe, and Paul, you can jump in here, but I believe that's
There's a big generator there.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it looks like Paul's on the phone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
so-
that the key there would be what event would actually trigger that. So,
Right.
now we use those common facilities during their normal working hours,
Right.
but to actually extend them.
Right.
Yeah.
Which common facilities are they?
5-15 then.
Thank you.
Well, close, like the community senior center, the library, during the worst of the heat wave this summer, those buildings were identified. I think those 2, what were the other
In the
ones?
mall.
In the mall, the Natick Mall, yeah.
And okay. And do they have any accommodation for, obviously they have restrooms, but do they have any accommodation for people to sit or, any bedding, not bedding, but, blankets or anything that could soften that?
I can speak on my building, community service building. There's plenty of sitting. There's several TVs in the building, and they can sit down and watch television. There's a library. They can grab a book and read a book. So there's very comfortable seating, couches, lounge chairs. So it's a very, very comfortable environment.
And Paul, you may not have heard the question that Sarah asked. Is there generator capability there so that even in the event of a power?
I know there is.
Yeah, Sarah, there's a generator kicks in immediately.
Yeah, that was what I thought, because I remember it being debated at town meeting, and enough of us thought it was a good idea that it got voted in as part of the project.
It's right outside my window. I can attest to that.
Where's your window?
Right outside the generator.
You want, address?
117,
I don't know.
Oh, yes, let's do that.
117 East Central Street.
Tom, you had your hand up as well, I think, but then lowered it.
I put it down.
Oh, okay. No other comment. All right. I'm going to turn the recording off at this point, just since Claire and Barry are no longer with us, but we can continue to chat for this. The one other topic, though, I also wanted to touch base on, it was just scheduling for Coffee with a Purpose sessions. I'm hunting down a few things that we might consider, but a couple that are very timely that I just wanted to get the group's input on is would be two just inwardly focused sessions, not inviting an outside speaker. We have fall town meetings starting up in just a couple of weeks, and we have quite a number of town meeting members in our own Coffee with a Purpose population. So I'd like to propose that next Monday, we have just an internal discussion for town meeting members, well, and others too, but really to just kind of do a pre-talk about what warrant articles they see as some of the most important or most controversial or whatever, to help prep all of us collectively for that meeting. And then the following Monday is a holiday. But then, so we won't have Coffee with a Purpose, but then the next one after that is starting to get close to the November election. And there are, I think, 4 ballot questions, maybe 5.
I think there are 4 currently. There
4,
could,
yeah.
I guess more could arrive, but
In any event, it could be also useful, again, just to have a discussion on just understanding what those ballot questions are really proposing, and arrive at least a common understanding, and give folks a chance to share their views, voting up or down on those. So,
Doug?
Yeah.
I went before the select board and the finance committee this week. I went before the finance committee. Officer Black went before the select board.